So I want to go into some Torah today, what we learned in this week's Torah portion, but I'm going to do a little pop quiz. Some of you have heard this recently, but it's going to go in a different direction than I took it last time. So your pop quiz is to figure out what the following have in common. I try and do this in one breath, but it's not easy. Aquaman, The Flash, Batman, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Catwoman, Daredevil, Green Lantern, Iron Man, Plastic Man, Silver Surfer, Spider-Man, Storm, Submariner, Superboy, Supergirl, Superman, the Atom, the Crow, the Fantastic Four. I tried. Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, Human Touch, The Thing, the Hulk, Thor, the Spirit, Wonder Woman, X-Men, Wolverine, Magneto, the Storm. The list goes on and on and on. What do they all have in common? You jump to the conclusion. They're all superheroes, all right? So we got to start, the bar's got to be set low. There's nowhere else for me to go, right? So they're all superheroes. That's all I really wanted participation-wise, but we'll share more later at the Shabbat Cafe of what they have in common. They also all have a fetish for spandex, which is another issue entirely. But really, yes, they were all created by Jews. This is where the interactive part ends. So the comic book actually was created by a Jew, Max Gaines. Will Eisner created the first graphic novel. EC Comics, Marvel Comics, Archie Comics, Mad Magazine, all created by Jews, right? No Jews, no superheroes industry. That's a whole other conversation as to why, but it's relevant. Why? Because back on the big screen in a theater near you is Wolverine, created by Stan Lee. Superman, created by Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. Iron Man, created by Jack Kirby. And the Lone Ranger, back on the big screen for the first time, the Lone Ranger, not a Jew. How do you know he's not a Jew? How many Jewish cowboys do you know, right? So other than the Lone Ranger, they're all Jewish. And that's a good conversation, but I've had that conversation before. A couple of years ago on the high holidays. A couple weeks ago at a mincha afternoon bat mitzvah, I recapped that talk. But today we're going to go in a different direction. Because even though they were all created by Jews, inspired by Jews, lots of Jewish themes to talk about woven into them, there's also a shadow side to these superheroes, and a shadow side that is not Jewish. Because if you look at Superman, or Iron Man, or Batman, what do you notice about their name? It all ends in man, not men, right? Not plural, not women. It's all about the single, solo, isolated individual. Yes, going out into the world and tikkun olam, fixing a broken world. That was a Jewish and is a Jewish message buried into the superhero myth. Absolutely. But going out into the world solo, solitary, sometimes with a sidekick, Robin or others, but not at first, not the original superheroes. Originally, they were all solo, solitary seekers of truth and justice in the American way. And that's great, except for the destructive quality of going at it alone. Because that's what all of these individuals did. They went out to the world and they went at it alone. And there's a danger to this message, right? And it's pervaded our pop culture. It's pervaded our society and how we think of ourselves as Americans. We are a go-it-alone culture and country. And this I can do it myself mentality is problematic. Right? This if I can't do it by myself myth is dangerous. And worst of all, this idea if I need other people to help me, I am weak. If this is the message we're sending out, it is destructive. And yet this is what we're teaching our young kids. This is what we believe as adults, right? To be a real man, to be a real woman, to be a real American, a real superhero, you have to go it alone. But the truth is, when you go it alone, you may go out and save the world. And many of these individuals, at least in theory, do, and many individuals in real life have. But you end up alone in life, and you end up lonely in life. And worse yet, you end up burnt out, and sometimes you end up dead. This week's Torah portion, we have the first Jewish superhero in the mighty Moses, right? The original superhero carrying his staff, slaying the Egyptian persecutors, saving the Israelites. He was the savior to these people. And at first, his mission was to go it alone, and sometimes you do have to go it alone, at least at the start, and that's what he did. Moses' problem, however, is that's not one way that he operates. It's the only way he operates. It's the only way he knows how to fly. He doesn't know another way. And that's why a few weeks ago we read in the book of Exodus some chastisements by his father-in-law. I know it's hard to believe. Moses' father-in-law wasn't so thrilled with his son-in-law. Why? And by the way, his father-in-law was right. Not always the case, but definitely the case in regards to Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Because Jethro saw his son-in-law doing everything for these people, tending to the Israelites, guiding the Israelites, adjudicating law for the Israelites. He was prosecutor, defense attorney, trial lawyer. He was judge, jury. He was warden. He was everything to them. And what was happening? He was wearing out. He was wearing down. He was wearing away. And his father-in-law stepped in and said, "You will wear away, both you and this people who are with you. For this thing that you're doing, it's too heavy for you. You are not able to perform it, you yourself alone." And of course, young, mighty Moses, a gever, as we say in Hebrew, strong, right? What does he do? He says, "I can go it alone." And he keeps going it alone throughout the remainder of the Torah until this week's Torah portion. He is so alone that he's alienated in this week's Torah portion from his brother and sister. No mention of his wife or his son. No mention of his father-in-law, no mention of mentors. He's got nobody in his life. And so what happens in this week's Torah portion as the Israelites keep on kvetching, complaining every step of the way? I know it's hard to believe. Jews kvetching in the desert. It was true then, it's true now. It took its toll on Moses, and Moses had nobody to turn to except himself and God. And in a moment of desperation, he turns to God. And he says the following: "I cannot carry this entire people alone. It is too hard for me." And then he says perhaps the most tragic verse to come out of his mouth in the entire Torah. "Ve'im kachat oseli hargeni na." If this is how it's going to be, God, if I have to go it alone and carry these people alone and bear the burden alone, then kill me now. Hargeni na, kill me now. We gloss over that. The cantor read it earlier. Hargeni na. What is he expressing? Moses is expressing suicidal wish, right? He would rather be dead than continue life as he knows it. That is a deeply challenging, problematic, terrifying statement when we stop and we look at it and we understand it for what it is. But we need to stop. And we need to hear it, and we need to talk about it as uncomfortable as it might be. Because on this week's Newsweek cover is a title that says something like "Suicide in America," right? In epidemic proportions. And that's what's happening in America. Over the past few weeks, I've been following reports coming out from the CDC and other places on the rise of suicide in our culture. The New York Times has had a few good articles this past 2 or 3 weeks. One of them says, over the last decade, the United States has become a less violent country in every way save one. As Americans commit fewer and fewer crimes against other people's lives and property, they commit more and more crimes against themselves, fatal crimes. They take their life. The suicide rate for Americans from 35 to 54 years old has increased 30%. For men in their 50s, it has risen 50% since 1999. More Americans now die of suicide than car accidents every year. And gun suicides are almost twice as common as gun homicides. We talk about gun homicides. We should talk about them, but we don't talk about the suicides. We don't talk about when it happens by somebody, by their own hand, to themselves. In the military, another article came out in the New York Times. It said that suicide rates in the American U.S. military are at an all-time high in this past year, 2012. The suicide rate among the nation's active duty military personnel has spiked this year, eclipsing the number of troops dying in battle. More soldiers took their own lives than lives were taken in battle. Suicide now claims more people every year than heart disease. It claims more lives than alcohol abuse, drug abuse, lung cancer combined. Suicide this year took more people's lives than war, than murder, than natural disasters combined. We need to talk about those other things, and we are free to talk about them in our congregations, in our communities, in our homes, in our society, and on the news, but we don't talk about suicide, and it is only escalating. It is not going away. And to top it all off, the most prone to suicide in our culture, the most prone, the United States Marine Corps. Marines topped the charts at the suicide rate. Marines, in my opinion, are the modern day superheroes. These are muscle-bound men and women, invincible warriors, right, out in the battlefield, facing things that most of us could never even imagine facing, the pinnacle of physical strength, and yet they are the most likely to take their own lives. Why? Why? It's not because of hardship, not because they're facing hard things, or people don't take their lives simply because of hardship out in the world. Did you know that in Nazi Germany, there was not a rise in the suicide rate in the Jewish communities, in spite of what was happening around them and to them? That is a remarkable statistic. Yes, there was a spike during the Depression era, but not much of a spike. It isn't always the obvious factors that we think about. Mental depression, yes, but mental depression has always been around. These factors add into the risk of somebody taking their own life, but they don't explain ultimately the reason why. The University of Virginia sociologist in one of these articles, Brad Wilcox, said it best: the only strong link that we can find in studies of suicide and why somebody takes their life are weakened social ties. People, particularly men, he says, become more likely to take their lives when they get disconnected from society's core institutions, from marriage, from family, from religion. Article after article, study after study tells us what we already know, that if you go it alone, for long enough, that if you go it alone through life's darkest moments, no matter who you are, no matter how strong you might be, no matter how tough or resilient you have proved in the past, you will burn up, you will burn out, and statistically speaking, it is very possible that you will take your life. But we also know the remedy for this. We know the most profound way to overcome this horrible statistic and reality, and that is told in the Torah. And something we could have intuited, but it's important to read thousands of years ago. What is God's antidote to this loneliness? God says, "Assemble, Moses, for yourself 70 men, elders, to guide you, to stand there with you. They will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you need not bear it alone." God tells Moses, share your power, share your responsibilities, and share your burden. This is the antidote to feeling alone in this world, and God forbid, taking your life. The Talmud tells us, what modern psychology tells us, what Western medicine tells us, what the most recent research tells us, that the best antidote against suicide is marriage and family and community and religion. And you know what the number one predictor of happiness is? Friendship. Friendship. Study after study recently, coming out of the positive psychology movement, has shown that having friends determines and dictates one's happiness or lack thereof in life. But the Talmud said this 2,000 years ago with the phrase, "Chavruta o mituta," give me friendship or give me death. But I don't think they realized they meant it literally. Give me friendship, because without friendship, we are all but as good as dead. We need one another to get through this life. We need family and friends and spouse and community and religion and God. We need, at the very least, to stop building up this message, this myth of go it alone mentality. We have to stop trying to be men and women of steel. We have to stop trying to be Wolverine, right? Going it alone. Find your Tonto, find your Robin, find your Wonder Woman. I did. Find whoever it is that can hold your hand and help you bear the burden so you don't go it alone. Or listen to the wisdom of the great Rabbis of yesteryear, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And join us as we give up this false idol of going it alone, and we join together and we find a little help from our friends. The words are on the lyrics. The lyrics are on the page in front of you on your handout. Please join us. This is impromptu. Cantor Alana and the Ruach Rally Band just threw this together for me the last moment. So join with them.
What would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song.
Feel free to put your arms around each other. Just don't light any lighters.
Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help
with a little help from my friends.
I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. What do I do when my love is away? To be alone. How do I feel by the end of the day? Are you sad because you're on your own? No, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help from my friends. Oh, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody?
Here we go.
I just need someone to love. Could it be anybody?
Here we go.
I want somebody to love. Would you believe in a love at first sight? Yes, I'm certain that it happens all the time. What do you see when you turn out the light? I can't tell you, but I know it's mine. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Oh, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need?
Here we go. You all know this line. Here we go.
I just need someone to love. Could it be?
What do you want? Here we go.
I want somebody to love. I get by with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. With a little help from my friends.
Give it up for the Ruach Rally Band and Cantor Lawn.